So the next thing that we want to do is we want to have our rocks be a little bit more interesting or a little bit more dynamic than just kind of sitting out here in space. They obviously need to pose some sort of threat or danger to our ship. So let's just jump back here, and I'm just going to remove a few of these for now. We don't need all of these here in our scene. So I'm just clicking on one and then hitting delete. So let's just stick with one rock. So what we want is we want these rocks moving towards our ship. Otherwise, why is our ship even shooting these things? It doesn't pose any danger. So to do this, we want to use a move towards or accelerate towards behavior. So if we jump into our behaviors and we double click on our rock again, we can drag accelerate towards. We're just going to drag that in outside the rule because we don't want any sort of rule to drive this. We just want this behavior to always be active with our rock. So right now it's accelerating towards 0, 0 in our scene, which is fine because if I hit preview, you can see that this rock is now moving, but it's moving here. And that's not exactly what we want. We want it to show up or move towards our ship. But how do we know where our ship is located in our scene? Now, if you know iPad resolution size, you can pretty much take a guess as to what the center point is between an iPad, which is 100, or I should say 1,024 pixels across by 768 pixels tall. But the easiest way to figure this out is by double clicking on the ship here inside your actual stage, not over here in the actor. So watch what happens. If I double click on the ship here in the stage, don't click this lock because you don't want to affect anything here. But if you go over into the attributes, you can see its position. And if we open up that pull down, you can see its position is at 509 by 376. Don't worry about the decimal points. So just remember 509 by 376 or whatever you have it set to in your stage. And we want to go back to the rock. And for this first number, we're going to type in that 509. And then for the second one, 376. I'm going to slow down the accelerate because that was way too fast. So let's just put it somewhere to around 10. And let's hit preview. So now instead of going to 0, 0, you can see our space rock slowly starts to speed up and move towards our ship. So if the challenge in this game was to eliminate the space rocks before they smash into the ship, again, I'm just holding the Alt or Option key as I duplicate this. If I preview and I just start shooting these rocks, we now have a much more challenging game where we have to avoid getting smashed by these space rocks that are moving towards us. So I'll reset that one more time. So great, now we actually have some sort of challenge here in our game with all these space rocks coming flying towards our ship. But there's a problem. They, just like the bullet earlier, completely pass through our ship and nothing exciting happens. So we want to set it up so that our ship actually gets destroyed and explodes just like we did with our space rocks. So we can essentially copy the exact same thing we did before. So let's jump into our ship actor. I'm just going to minimize some of these rules. Now let's create a brand new rule, create rule. And again, we're going to switch this to overlap and collides. So when our ship overlaps and collides with the actor rock, which it's already set to, what do we want to happen? Well, we want the ship to get destroyed. What also do we want to happen? Well, like we did with our rock, we want our ship to spawn a new actor, and the actor that we want it to spawn is that explosion. So let's see what happens now when a rock comes in contact with our ship. We get an explosion. Let's preview that one more time. So we're fending off these rocks and we're doing the best that we can to try to, and then we messed up. We couldn't get the last two rocks here inside of our scene, so now our ship is exploding. Now, one last thing that I'd like to show you is notice when the rock smacks into the ship, the explosion is actually below the rock, which is fine, but maybe you want the explosion to be on top of the rocks. Well, if we back up and we actually look at our scene here, so right now we're set on this game tab and we switch over to scene tab, you notice that you have this layers option here. And this is how everything in your scene is layered on top of everything else. So you can see here at the very bottom we have the space background, where if I click on that you can see it's selected here in my scene. Then I have my ship, which again, as I click on that layer you can see it's selected. And then I have a whole bunch of rocks. So we can actually click on the ship layer and drag that up so it's on top of everything else. So now when a rock shows up, or when a rock bangs into our ship, because the ship's on top and the ship is going to spawn an actor on top of itself, that explosion should be on top of the rocks. So let's just preview this. So we'll try our best to defend ourselves against all the space rocks, and then one gets by and then you can see the explosion is sitting on top of the rocks, which is no good. Now it might be hard to see in this video, but you'll see that there is this small little leftover bit of explosion kind of sitting in the scene here. I can see it, and if you've done everything along and followed along with the videos, you're going to see these tiny little residues, which is fine. Maybe you want that kind of like floating there in space, but it's something that we definitely want to fix. So if we jump back into the explosion, you can see it's this little tiny last piece here that is left over that we want to get rid of. Now there's a few ways to get rid of this. One, you could have created a completely blank image, a completely transparent image that is maybe number 12, and then it'll kind of fade off the animation to that last piece. But we don't have that right now. So let's solve this problem inside GameSalad. So as I mentioned, because we have about 10 images, well, we have 11, and we're doing about 10 frames per second, which I'll switch to 11, so we're doing exactly 1 second our animation. We can set up a timer that after 1 second we do something. So what do we want to do? We want to destroy this actor. So what's going to happen is this explosion is going to be spawned either by a rock or by the ship, and after 1 second it's going to destroy this actor. So let's hit preview and see what happens. So now you'll notice that there is no explosion left. If I were to slow this animation down, so now we're doing 1 frame per second, so each one of these frames gets 1 second, so technically our explosion would last 11 seconds. You're going to see that it doesn't even stick around that long because we get our actor destroyed. So see how after 1 second we're destroying our actor? You can see it hangs out for 1 second and then it gets destroyed. So I just wanted to demonstrate that for you. So we can go back to 11 frames per second, and we're going to keep our actor being destroyed after 1 second. And again, we get a much cleaner scene now where we're blowing up these space rocks and we're not left with that last frame because we're destroying the actor after 1 second. So what we have so far are just kind of a bunch of rocks that we placed here inside of our stage that fly towards our ship. And what we want to do is kind of make it feel like the rocks are kind of randomly coming out from the edges of our screen here. So let's back up and we can start deleting these. So we'll just remove all of these space rocks from our scene. And what we want to do is use the spawn behavior that we've used several times so far to kind of spawn rocks at random times here inside the scene or the stage. So we'll create a brand new actor, an empty actor, and I'm going to rename this actor and we'll call it Rock Spawner. And we'll double click on the actor and we're going to drag in a timer. So right now our timer says every 5 seconds, we'll just switch that to maybe 1, we want it to do something. So in this case we want it to spawn an actor. So our timer says every 1 second spawn this actor, which we already have it set to rock. So let's see what happens if we take the spawn rock actor and drop that here into our stage and hit preview. Well, every 1 second, that rock is going to show up. You can see it's spawning a whole bunch of rocks. We can just sit here all day long blowing them up, which is actually kind of fun when they're all lined up like that. So every 1 second we have a rock. I'm going to shoot it. We get a lot of explosions, and that's a lot of fun. So that's great, but what we want to do is we want to randomize the timing. So right now we have it set up for every 1 second we're spawning this rock. Now I'm going to show you your very first expression, which is a very, very simple but incredibly powerful expression to use. So see this little icon right here with the letter E on it? We're going to double click on that. And we're going to click on this drop down next to Insert Function. And this can be overwhelming, so don't worry if you don't know what all of these are. But the one that you're going to worry about right now is the one called Random. So we're going to scroll down to Random, and this is very easy to understand. See how when I selected Random, it inserted this little expression that says Random Min Max? All you need to do is replace the min and the max with the times that you want the rock to show up in. So min, we're going to make sure that we replace that with maybe 2, which would be 2 seconds. And for max, we're going to replace that, let's say, with 6. So 6 seconds. So what does this expression mean now? It means randomly choose between either 2 seconds or 6 seconds. So either 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 to spawn a rock. So if I click this check mark now that we've created that expression, we can hit preview, and it shouldn't show up every second. It should show up every 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000. So every few seconds here, it's actually spawning a new rock. So that one waited a few seconds. So if we duplicate this actor, so I'll click on the actor, hold the Alt or Option key, and put it in different locations, and then preview this. You can see we have rocks showing up in different locations, spawning at different times, and it kind of makes our scene a little bit more random. And now we have rocks kind of coming from different angles, and now we have a little bit more of a challenge. Instead of just seeing all the rocks already inside our scene, we can kind of see where they are, or we can see how they're kind of randomly spawning from different locations. So what you can do now is you can actually drag these spawn actors off the stage. So I'm going to drag these in different locations off the stage. And I'll duplicate a few more of them. Make sure they're not visible here on my stage. And that's quite a lot. So this is going to be a bit of a challenge if we preview this now. So now we don't see any rocks. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, as our rocks are spawned, you can see that they just start flying in at us from different random locations. And now we have a game with these space rocks coming from all sorts of different angles. And of course, if one of our rocks smacks into our ship, that's pretty much game over. And now we have a whole bunch of rocks just flying around in outer space. So let's back up. And what I want to adjust now are two things. One, I want to kind of make a few less rocks because that just started to get insane. And secondly, if we preview this, you notice that the rocks just kind of hover over each other, which again isn't very realistic. So I'll just play this simulation of our game for a moment, and we'll let our rocks kind of smash into our ship here. And then you'll notice that right away the rocks themselves kind of just start passing through each other, which looks a little strange. So how do we get these rocks to collide with one another? Well, we could jump into the rock and apply a collide behavior. So if we drag collide in here, we want the rock to actually collide with itself. So we have the rock colliding with the rock, and then we hit preview. And I'll just shoot one of these guys for good sport. And then now you'll notice the rocks actually start to collide with each other. Now, you may notice that the way they're colliding with each other is a little bit strange in the sense that they don't actually ever seem to touch each other. And that's because if you remember the physics video that you watched earlier, not in this series, but in the basic series, you'll notice that in the attributes here for each one of your actors, you have a physics pull down and you have a collision shape. This is the shape around the actor. So if I switch this to circle, you'll notice that now when I play the simulation, you're going to get things that look like they intersect a little bit better. So I'm doing my best to defend myself here. And then, of course, I fail. And then now you can see that the rocks kind of pass over each other a little bit before they actually start bouncing off each other, which is exactly what we want. Now you also notice that the rocks are rotating. If you like that, then you can keep it exactly as it is, but if you want to limit that, you'll notice that you have this checkbox here under physics that says fixed rotation. If I click on that and I hit preview, again, they'll collide with each other, but now you actually won't see them rotating around their axes. So our ship is destroyed, and our rocks kind of always stay in one rotation angle. So again, really that's completely up to you whether you want that or don't want that. And then last but not least, let's go ahead and limit the rocks. So if we jump back into the rock spawner, we're spawning between every 2 and 6 seconds. So if you want to change this expression, all you have to do is click on it again. And now instead of every 2 to 6, let's just do something like every 6 to 10 seconds and hit the check mark again. Preview that. We're going to get a few less rocks, or at least rocks spawning in bigger time gaps from each other. And you can adjust that, of course, depending on how many rocks you want inside your scene. So we have spawners, but we can actually just make our scene a little bit interesting by putting a few rocks in here in the beginning, because you saw that it kind of took a little while for rocks to even show up. So if you don't want your player to sit around waiting, twiddling his thumbs while he waits for rocks to show up, you can put these 3 in here, which are just there automatically, and they already have the accelerate towards behavior, so they're just going to be right in your scene reacting with the ship while we're waiting for these other ones to kind of come into play. So we have these 3 guys to shoot first, and then by the time we're done shooting these 3 guys, we should see a few of these rocks entering into our scene. So it was kind of like the first wave of enemies with the second wave. And of course, be as creative as possible. Right now we're using rocks, but these could be space bugs or other ships or all sorts of things. But right now, while you have this artwork to play with, we're going to, of course, use rocks. And then, of course, we get our second wave coming in that we have to defend ourselves again. So you're going to want to tweak the timing as much as possible to kind of change the difficulty. And as we get along with this game and we start working with different scenes and setting up different scenes, you can obviously make level 1, level 2, and change their difficulty as far as the speed. Remember, we changed the acceleration of the rocks themselves. And, of course, the frequency in which the rocks are showing up into the scene will give you a bunch of dynamic levels that you can work with.